Okay. So in part 3, we're going to be talking about breaking down those cultural and historical barriers that have been in place before we had the movement toward person-centered planning and individualized approaches. So what's society's relationship then with PCP? Well, person-centered planning has a very strong connection to society and to social relations and interrelations across society. So it's a big part of its approach. It foresees the integration of individuals fully into society. So we're looking at social inclusion. By itself, person-centered planning isn't sufficient to promote social inclusion to the desirable level. So we have to think about how can we make differences? How can we make this work? Well, if we look at the traditions, the traditional approaches and the PCP approaches. If we look at the traditional approach in terms of professionals and friends and the relationship to the person, there was usually an unequal ratio of professionals, friends and family involved in the process of decision making. So it tended to be that professionals made the decisions and advised family, and the person was at the bottom end of the decision making process and they were slotted in wherever was necessary. Whereas with PCP, we're looking at equal ratios between professionals and family, and very much with the person equally involved. In the traditional sense, it was a formal process. It was a preordained and pre-mapped process. So there could be very little movement with that. Systems were set down and set out, and that was what we had to work to. Whereas with PCP processes, we have divergent problem-solving processes. So if there are barriers and difficulties to people achieving their goals, then we think about how we're going to break down those barriers. We think about how we're going to make those opportunities become reality. Also, the traditional processes historically were regulated by paperwork that was the mandated paperwork. This is the way we do it. And new people coming into professional roles would be told, this is the paperwork, this is how we do it. And the whole person and their lives and everything that goes around the person has to slot into that. Whereas with person-centered planning, it's facilitated by collaborative communication. So if you like, although we have templates that we use, because it's helpful to have a template, that template is flexible. It's a facilitation. It's actually a tool by which we can develop systems and processes around the individual. So traditionally, we had professional settings and everything would happen in the professional setting. I can remember years ago working in a hospital, and this was with people with special educational needs. And once every week, the psychiatrist would come and do what we called a ward round. So the psychiatrist and all the people on the ward and the nurses, of course, because it was a clinical environment, and social work staff would all sit round in a big circle and things would be formally discussed. There was no individual leaning to this process. It was because we had the boxes had to be ticked, that they checked this person's medication and that person's medication and their behaviours and how they'd performed that week. And this was done in an open forum. Terrible situation for the individuals who were involved in that. Whereas with PCP, we're looking at informal settings. You can have a PCP facilitation meeting in the local cafe. You can go out to do it. You can go to somewhere that the person likes and enjoys being at. we have all sorts of different examples of wonderful places that person-centered planning meetings have taken place. It doesn't have to be within an organizational confine. Traditionally, it was a very serious atmosphere, as I've just said about the ward round. So the professionals sat around, they made decisions based on what the other professionals advised them. So decisions were made, and it was a very formal process, a very serious process. Notes were taken, and from those notes, then everything was written down and cast in stone. Whereas again, with the PCP process, we're looking at working through relationships. We're looking at having fun and making these gatherings, I'll call them, fun for the people involved. So that actually then reinforces that this atmosphere is about the person. This isn't about the process. So in the old traditional way, outcomes guided the process. So, okay, so we need to get these outcomes. We need to tick these boxes to say we've done this, this, and this with this individual. So how is the process going to give us those outputs and outcomes that we need to deliver? Whereas with the PCP process, we have a more flexible process. We meet regularly, and the relationships between the people involved actually guide the process. So traditionally, life planning and people's lives going forward and opportunities that came to that person was actually the gift of the professional. It was the responsibility of the professionals involved to make decisions about that person's life, and they had to take responsibility for that. Whereas with the person-centered planning process, we're looking at a group shared responsibility. And that group being, yes, there'll be professionals within the group, but also there'll be friends. There'll be the guy that lives next door. There'll be family. There'll be people that are important to the individual. And of course, the individual very much themselves. So if we look at the issues with the traditional method, it's starting to emerge that the traditional approach towards autism spectrum conditions and the support of those people has some issues. Individuals have said that it doesn't give them the right help at the right time. If we look at legislation and what's happened around the legislation that's been brought in 2001 in the UK, we had the Valuing People movement. And Valuing People was a new strategy. And you see, it's quite recent, 2001, it's only 20 years ago, which for somebody like me is very recent. So 2001, I remember this being implemented in UK. We had a new strategy for learning disability for the 21st century. And this was a huge, great big thing. And lo and behold, this strategy allowed people, and in fact encouraged people, to have choice, to have independence, to have their rights met, to know their rights and have their rights met, and also inclusion as valued members of society and the community. At around this time as well, an organisation was developed called People First, and that was developed in the 1990s in the UK. And People First was a self-advocacy organisation. So it was actually led by people with disability, and those people with disabilities actually ran the organisation and made decisions within the organisation and drove forward the whole culture of people with disability having their rights, having choices, and having a voice. And this was for the first time. This goes back to the 1990s. Again, I remember working with a People First group on self-advocacy in the Midlands in UK back in the 1990s. And it was all terribly, terribly exciting. I think it may be partly due to the work of this group and the drive of this group that we we ended up in part with the Valuing People legislation of 2001. So if we look at the barriers, both cultural and historical, because there have been barriers, as it's an approach based on empowerment and independence, it actually clashes with tradition. So it has had its barriers. People have said, well, what's the matter with the way we've always done it? The main barriers reported are maintaining trained facilitators. So difficulties in getting people trained up in the first place to deliver person-centred planning and to facilitate person-centred planning. People perceive that they have a lack of time to do this, but it's an investment that will pay back. So lack of time to train facilitators and lack of time to actually do the planning process. Difficulties with staff turnover and staffing issues. And in care and support, certainly in the UK, and I know in many other countries probably, the turnover of social care staff and in some cases nursing staff is quite high. So actually keeping the right people there in place has been a problem traditionally in terms of health and care workers. Also community support may be somewhat limited. In order to push and drive person-centred planning and self-advocacy forward, we also have to work with the communities to change the attitude and culture within local communities so they're more accepting of people to go out there and be part of the community and valued as such. And also the fact that there may be in some countries and some places limited choice in terms of where people live. It says here residential services. I would say in terms of where people live because it doesn't have to be residential, and choice also in terms of where people spend their days and day services. So for instance, what we need to see are more opportunities in terms of supported living, in terms of people being able to be tenants in their own homes with their own tenancy agreements, which we do have a number of those in UK, people with disabilities and including people with autism who have their own tenancies, who are tenants in their own rights, and they buy in support as and when they need it. So the word treatment here is also very indicative in that we're not here to treat people. They're not ill. You know, that's not what it's about, treating people. They don't need treating, they need supporting. So terminology becomes really, really important. So what can professionals do? Well, they can help in better implementing and contributing to person-centred plans in 4 different ways, according to a model by Kilbane and Sanderson, 2004. So we can introduce, professionals can help by simply introducing the person-centred planning approach and advocacy when they're working. Now, this is what we're doing here today, or this is you listening to me talking. I'm introducing the system. I'm saying this is an important system. It's a tried and tested, effective system, and it will help to empower people with disabilities. Now, any organisation, any country, any culture that actually values that empowerment of people with disabilities will want to hear the message, will take the message on board, and will then deliver that message outside of your own environment and your own forums to other forums. So this is about spreading the word. Professionals can also help by drafting and implementing plans to cooperate with each other. And professionals and individuals should all be involved in that. So it's not just the professionals that do all the doing. We involve the family, we involve individuals in drafting and implementing any planning that goes on. professionals can also safeguard the quality of what we do, the quality of planning, and to share their experiences and knowledge across people, across cultures, maybe across countries, and also within the community that you're close by and that you work within. So professionals have a very key role in making person-centred planning, and the advocacy that goes with that, a key role in making that happen. Here in Cyprus right now, I understand that there is a strong focus coming into Cyprus through the EU and across the EU of self-advocacy. And person-centred planning and self-advocacy work very closely together. So it is of the moment, this process now within the European Union, and countries that haven't previously been involved in the process have the opportunity to not only study disability rights and how does that work within your own country or culture, but also how do people plan their lives if they have any sort of disability within your own culture or within your own country. So implementing and integrating, again, professionals can help with this. So integrating person-centred planning values and thinking and processes within everyday professional practice. So people actually have a shift and a change in how they think. We need to encourage all professionals to start at that point of the individual. We're not doing things to people anymore, we're doing things with people. We're supporting people. We're not taking a clinical view, we're taking a holistic and individual view, supporting that person who's the most important person to make choices, to be valued as part of the community. And our role as professionals and facilitators is to find ways to help that to happen, to help the process to work. There are negative sides and difficulties to implementing PCP, let's not get it wrong. There are the challenges that come with it. But hey, you know, barriers are there to be broken. That's what they're there for. We're there to break down the barriers. That's our role as professionals. That's our voice as professionals. And challenges toward the system can be actually the way forward towards innovation and new thinking and application of new methods. So 3 small steps to break down the barriers. These are things that professionals do to try to prevent prejudices in people facing person-centred planning for the first time. There are 3 key aspects to this and on which we can focus when we're trying to put the ideas across to non-professionals. Involve families. This is key. People with disability don't come alone. Even if they're adults, they come with a family around them, usually. Usually they come with a family around them. And because they have a disability, and particularly people with autism spectrum conditions, very often, that family have had to very much protect that individual as they've grown up. They've gone through difficulties as a family, possibly because of the autism in their midst. They've had to cope, they've had to manage. Now, it's very wrong to expect that at 18 years of age, a family are just going to say, okay, you're 18, off you go, you're on your own. It's just not going to happen. So it's not fair to say, to be honest, right, okay, the family no longer have to be involved in decision making. Of course, the family have to be involved in decision making. Although at the end of the day, it's the individual who makes the choices. The family will usually be very, very much involved. And also the family have a lot to contribute in terms of history, in terms of things that the individual has enjoyed before. They have a lot to bring to the table. So let's involve them and help them to understand the importance that they have in the person-centred planning approach. Informality, again, is the key. And I talked about, you know, a party with everything pink. I've seen lots of different person-centred planning meetings, which have been great fun and everybody's thoroughly enjoyed, and why not? And in order for a group to last and that group to be efficient, it has to be informal. If you push people too hard into formal settings, they're not going to really sign up and want to be involved. People have to be committed and not forced to help to design the plan. Self-advocacy, because I've mentioned it once or twice, it's about speaking up for yourself and your interests. So that's what we're encouraging these individuals to do and to support them in. Speaking up for themselves and their interests. It was once used as a name for a civil rights movement and mutual aid networks for disabled people. So we're hearing a lot nowadays, you know, we've had COVID and one thing and another, we're hearing a lot about people's rights. Well, disabled people have rights, and civil rights apply to them as much as any other group. And actually, this was driven in the broader civil rights movement of the 1960s, in fact, and the 1970s. So we went from the 60s and 70s with civil rights to the 90s with things like People First, to the 2000s when we got valuing people legislation. So it's been going on a long time and developing and growing a long time. Self-advocacy skills include the individual being familiar with their own strengths, to recognise their own power and their own strengths and weaknesses, knowing exactly what to ask for and what help they need, and knowing exactly how to ask for what they need, who to ask, when to ask. This is the whole issue around self-advocacy, that many of us, I won't say all of us, because some people are better at advocating for themselves anyway, neurotypical people will sometimes struggle with self-advocacy. Having said that, we know that people with disability will be less able to make their voices heard unless we support them in doing that. Here we have some more references for this section, which you may like to pursue some of these areas in more detail. So the references are there for you to see. And we're just going to now change sections.